Good Monday. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Well, as we've been looking at the 6-month forecast, and the reason that I keep coming back to this 6-month forecast, which is provided by the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, looking across the nation at what kind of economic growth, just to post you that the light green, the dark green is an indicator of economic growth. The dark blue is growth over 4.5%, and the pink is essentially a slight negative in terms of growth, also with Rhode Island being in that group. When we look at that, is that we suggest, Dr. Ed and myself, that this is something that every community bank uses in terms of not only looking at their individual state in terms of what kind of economic growth is in the future, but also for all the states across the country, because it gives you an indicator. Our feeling is this is giving us an indicator of probably above 3% growth. It's probably also giving us a very clear indicator in terms of unemployment continuing to fall. And it's important that we have these kind of indicators. We also like to call it in our capital planning event triggers, so that if you started to see any of these states or the majority of the states turning into the negative, that pink, red, dark red zone, is that once again it provides a platform for discussion at board meetings, at ALCO meetings, that are we going to start to see an impact not only to our own local economies, but our state economies and our national economy. And the thing that we've been saying is so great is that we don't have any dark red states anymore, that they've disappeared here over the fourth quarter of 2011, so that we just have some mildly the pink slight decline in growth expected over the next 6 months for those states. Also important is that, is the Fed too pessimistic in here? The question goes back to that period of right before the financial crisis and the Great Recession, is that the Fed remained optimistic during that time period that the economy would not derail in here, we wouldn't go into a recession, that everything was okay. And yet we know what happened. So now the Fed may be too pessimistic, expecting unemployment to remain above an 8.3% for all of 2012, expecting in that neighborhood a very slight GDP growth through 2012. Is that too pessimistic compared to looking at this? Well, what we did is that we said, okay, one of the things that a listener called in about was, gee whiz, how did this exactly react back in before the Great Recession? Was this giving warning signs? So we went back and looked at the information. And what we saw was that in 2006, for instance, June of 2006, there were only 2 states in the red. And we were experiencing a lot of economic growth back then, as we'll all remember, that the economy was doing very well. And then what started to occur is that the states started to pick up, so that in December of 2007, we moved up to 15 states were in the red. And that should have been a very clear sign that something was happening out there, because it rapidly increased. We then, in March of 2008, had 35 states in the red. That would be a big warning sign that we were headed to a recession. Once again, in March of 2008, that was before the financial crisis, 6 months earlier than where the financial crisis hit, 6 months before we started moving into declining economies, and that this was showing on that 6-month forecast that the majority of states were in that negative economic growth zone. So then we look at June of 2008, 3 months before the financial crisis, and we suddenly had 46 states in the red. Pretty amazing, huh, how this works. So the thing that we like to sit there and say is, yes, we agree that overall, when we look at this, is that Dr. Ed and I believe that this is a great indicator to use at every community bank, and this should be part of every board and ALCO meeting. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Have a great week.